So nut, Wallace.
Hey.
Mark, Verity, thank you for your time. I'm back tomorrow. See you then,
Thank you.
3:45.
Te whakarongo mai koe ki te reo irirangi o Aotearoa. This is Checkpoint on RNZ National. I'm Lisa Owen. E haere ake nei, the government ranks the team of 5 million. Where are you in the queue to get a COVID vaccination? The priority list for the Pfizer jab is revealed. So are the Black Caps and Olympians on it, and are they ahead of supermarket workers? Minister Chris Hipkins joins us live. The Aussie Prime Minister lobs the travel bubble ball back into Jacinda Ardern's court. The push for Wellington bus drivers to be paid at least the living wage. And Immigration New Zealand explains why it's scuppered the plans of a super yacht headed here for a mega refit. And racing this time, finally, the battle for the old mug is underway. We will have the latest. Don't forget, you can watch us live on Facebook.
RNZ News at 5. Kia ora, ko Susana Leata with DNA. People in rest homes start getting their COVID jabs this month, with anyone over 65 in line for one from May. COVID-19 Response Minister Chris Hipkins has laid out who comes after border workers, their families and frontline health workers. Health correspondent Rowan Quinn reports.
2 million New Zealanders will be vaccinated by July if everything goes to plan. Health workers who could pass on COVID to vulnerable people are next in line, along with those living in high-risk settings like aged care. That group includes older people or those with dangerous health conditions who live in South Auckland, with Chris Hipkins stopping short of vaccinating the whole area early. He says vaccinations for the rest of the population should begin in July. No decision's been made on prioritising international sports people. Ko Rowan Quinn tēnei.
National claims the government's vaccine rollout plan is half-baked. Party leader Judith Collins says the plan is lacking in detail and the booking system and online tool aren't yet ready.
If you're going to have a system, you have to have it operational. It's good that we're now talking about vaccine rollouts, but actually people expect better. New Zealanders who are living in Australia can go online, they can put their details in and they can be told around about when they will be able to be vaccinated.
Judith Collins. The Associate Minister of Health says the Māori health providers will receive almost $25 million for community-based vaccine services. Peeni Hienare announced an overall package of $39 million for the Māori COVID-19 vaccination plan. There will also be 40,000 courses of the vaccine, specifically for Māori and Pasifika health providers, to reach those who may struggle to get to clinics or who are hesitant. Minister Hienare says $11 million will be provided directly to Māori health providers so they can build their workforce and infrastructure. Team New Zealand has won the opening America's Cup race in Auckland, comfortably beating Italian syndicate Luna Rossa by over half a minute. The Cup defenders won the start, but Luna Rossa lodged a protest at the first attack, only for it to be dismissed. Around the first mark, Team New Zealand led by 14 seconds, extending that to 23 seconds at the second. The Italians clawed back a few seconds at the third and fourth marks, but by the fifth and final one, Team New Zealand were ahead by 20 seconds. They extended that to eventually cross the finish line 31 seconds ahead. The government is defending the hold-up on a two-way Trans-Tasman travel bubble. Australian Prime Minister Scott Morrison said today that the country is ready for a two-way bubble, but it is waiting on New Zealand. He says in the meantime, Australia will continue to benefit from the one-way bubble. COVID-19 Response Minister Chris Hipkins says an agreement is yet to be reached between the two countries on what will happen to travellers if the safe travel zone is suspended.
We have to be in a position to provide some certainty about what will happen for those people in the event that the safe travel zone is suspended. It could well mean we have tens of thousands of people unable to travel home, and we need to be clear about what will happen in those circumstances.
Chris Hipkins says the government cannot commit to the bubble being in place in the next month. The jury in the trial of a prominent businessman accused of indecent assault has heard details about thousands of dollars in payments made to his co-accused. The businessman denies indecently assaulting 3 men and making 2 attempts to dissuade a witness. His co-accused, who also has name suppression, faces 1 charge of attempting to dissuade a witness, which he too denies. Giving evidence at the High Court in Auckland, Detective Sergeant Anthony Darville went through bank records showing the flow of money between accounts associated with the pair. It's alleged the defendants offered one of the complainants in the case money in exchange for his silence after he decided to go to the police. The trial before Justice Venning and a jury of 9 women and 3 men continues. It's 4 minutes past 5. Team New Zealand has won the opening races of the America's Cup, beating Luna Rossa by 31 seconds. The defenders won the start and opened up a 14-second lead on the first leg before extending that to a 23-second lead by the second mark. Helmsman Peter Burling was then able to cover the Italians for the rest of the race. Burling told TVNZ it was key to get a fast start.
It's definitely obviously good to get off the line and get a few shifts up that first beat. Yeah, really happy with the pre-start and the way that the whole team's got the boat in good shape.
Race 2 is scheduled to start at 5:15. Sonny Bill Williams says he will focus on becoming a champion boxer after conceding his body can no longer stand up to the rigours of rugby league. Williams, who won 2 Rugby Union World Cups with the All Blacks, has dabbled in boxing since a first professional bout in 2009. But the 35-year-old plans to get more serious about it after building a gym in Sydney. Porto have upset Juventus to reach the Champions League football quarterfinals on away goals after a 4-4 aggregate draw. Juventus won the second leg match 3-2, but Porto advanced on away goals. Borussia Dortmund also advanced to the next stage after a 2-2 draw with Sevilla after giving them a 4-5 win on aggregate. The former All Black Ross Filippo has been appointed coach of the Waikato side for this season's national provincial competition, the Mitre 10 Cup. That's the news.
Complaints about the use of te reo rejected.
That's another organisation pushing a line in the sand and saying we're not pandering to racism anymore.
Racism in the UK media highlighted.
Here, it's always up for debate. You get dismissed as being a woke liberal if you try and speak about it. You'll have TV anchors on primetime morning television shouting down black women.
And bits of a meteorite discovered in Gloucestershire.
Extremely rare, dates from the really beginning of the solar system, and it was just, it was just mind-blowing.
Stellar coverage. Morning Report, weekdays from 6, on air and online.
Now the short forecast from Met Service to midnight tomorrow. Northland to Manawatu, including Coromandel, Bay of Plenty and Central High Country. Showers turning to rain for a time, heavy falls and thunderstorms possible. Gisborne and Hawke's Bay, cloud increasing, rain developing tonight or tomorrow morning. Horowhenua to Wellington, also Wairarapa. Isolated showers turning to rain for a time today and again tomorrow morning, clearing tomorrow evening. Marlborough and Nelson, rain clearing tonight, then cloudy periods. Isolated showers about the ranges tomorrow. Buller to Fiordland, partly cloudy with isolated showers, clearing and becoming fine in Fiordland tonight and elsewhere tomorrow. Canterbury and Otago, rain easing to a few showers tonight, clearing tomorrow and becoming fine. Southland, showers clearing overnight, generally fine tomorrow. Chatham Islands, mostly cloudy with a period of rain tomorrow. RNZ National at 7 minutes past 5.
Thanks, Susanna. Kia ora, this is Checkpoint and I'm Lisa Owen. The government's ranked the team of 5 million, unveiling its priority groups for the mass Pfizer vaccine rollout. The order for who gets the jab and when is so far broken into 4 main categories, with some subgroups within those. We already knew about border workers, their whānau and frontline health workers going first, but here's the new stuff. 2 million at-risk Kiwis will be targeted in the first 4 months of the rollout. Some South Aucklanders get priority, the over 65s, and anyone in that area with specified health conditions that make them higher risk. Generally, those 75 and over will go ahead of people with conditions like diabetes and respiratory disease. 40,000 courses of the Pfizer vaccine are going to Māori and Pacifica providers to prioritise and hand out. And the tail enders, the general population, that's about 2 million healthy people, while their vaccinations are scheduled to start from July. The government's still working on 2 other categories: people needing a vaccine for compassionate grounds and also a so-called national significance category. Now, read Olympians, potentially the Black Cats, diplomats and foreign affairs workers in that category. Well, joining me now is COVID Response Minister Chris Hipkins. Good evening, Minister. The thing is, Auckland has basically had 5 lockdowns, right? So why not just prioritise Auckland as a whole, vaccinate the entire of the Auckland region, then have a different strategy for the rest of the country?
Well, what we've done is set out a sequence framework that's based on 2 things. Those people who are most at risk of getting COVID-19, and that does have a very heavy emphasis on Auckland and South Auckland in particular, and then those who are most at risk of being adversely affected if they were to get COVID-19, so that's the elderly and those with health conditions that put them into the higher risk category. So they have been our first orders of priority. When it comes to the larger groups and when it comes to the larger rollout, of course, we will be thinking very carefully about the fact that Auckland as a region is more at risk than some other parts of the country. That will become a logistical challenge for us as we get into that point where we're trying to vaccinate as many people as quickly as we can.
So have you released all the evidence and advice that you base this list on?
The advice was based on, was good health advice. Some of that was verbal. We had some interchanges. The Director General of Health came to the Cabinet conversation about that, so he was able to give us, so we were able to really interrogate that and to discuss it. But we certainly will be releasing more advice and more of the information on which we based our decisions.
So there's no documentation to go with this decision? You weren't provided with briefing papers or anything like that? Are you going to release that information?
Oh, absolutely. Yep. Look, there have been briefing papers. There was a fairly comprehensive cabinet paper as well, and we'll absolutely be releasing that.
Let's look at some examples. So people in counties Manukau DHB catchment, 65 or over or with one of the listed health conditions, they're going to get priority end of March. So how many do you think are in that group specifically?
So in terms of the overall category of people who are living in settings or locations that are at higher risk, so that includes the older people in counties Manukau, older people living in an aged residential care environment and so on, that's about 234,000 people.
But you can't pin down the counties Manukau component that I've just talked to there.
Oh, I don't have it in front of me, but we can certainly get that breakdown.
There are some unintended consequences of this, and here's an example. You could have a perfectly healthy, retired 65-year-old in Half Moon Bay, which is in that DHB catchment. They could be a homebody who doesn't go out that often. They would get the vaccination ahead of, for example, a 35-year-old supermarket worker who's dealing with people every day, and that worker could have diabetes, and they could be just over the border in Otago, and they would get it after the perfectly healthy 65-year-old who is not in contact with people every day. So where is the equity in that?
Oh, look, there is no perfect way of drawing a distinction as to which groups go first in the sequencing framework. Wherever we draw that distinction, there will always be, some people who could justify being higher on the list, and some people who could say, well, that person's eligible for one and they should be lower on the list. All of the different scenarios we've gone through, there is no way to avoid that.
So you accept that there are some people who, they'll get a raw deal, but that is just the nature of prioritising people?
Look, it's almost impossible to avoid that. We work very, very, very hard. Like I said, we're focused on things that are most at risk and people that are most at risk. There is some discretion here. So if you look at the overall prioritisation list that we've issued, there is some discretion for those health professionals who are actually doing the vaccination to make sensible decisions. For example, if you've got a household coming along, 3 of them meet the criteria and 1 of them doesn't, and they're all in the room at the time, the pragmatic thing would be to vaccinate those people, to make sure that you're protecting them all. So they'll be able to make those kind of decisions. If you've got an elderly person who sits in category, so if you've got a person, so a frontline health worker that might sit in category 2A, and one of their household members is in category 2B, well, you'd vaccinate them both at the same time. So there will be a degree of flexibility here.
So on your flowchart of priorities here, where are the bus drivers and the countdown workers who have oodles of face-to-face contact, and particularly with supermarket workers, kept us going through that lockdown, and we're exposed at times to COVID cases? Where are they in this list? What category?
So those who have health conditions that puts them more at risk will be covered under the relevant criteria, under the relevant group. Those that are healthy, they will be covered in category 4 or group 4, which is when we get to the broad population rollout.
So they have to wait for the mass vaccination rollout.
Yeah, like I said, our focus here has been on people who are the most at risk, either of catching COVID-19 in the first place or having an adverse reaction from it.
Well, they are at risk, aren't they, Minister? I mean, you could count how many times did someone with COVID go into a supermarket, particularly Countdown, and those workers soldiered through during the various outbreaks and kept essential services going, yet they're right in that tail-end group. Is that fair?
Oh, look, they did an amazing job of working through the lockdowns, and we absolutely, I think, as a country, thank them for that. Our framework around sequencing the rollout of the vaccine, though, is based on who's most at risk of catching COVID or who's most at risk of being adversely affected by it.
So also just this category of national significance, this is obviously aimed at, Olympians and the Black Caps and those kinds of people?
Look, we'll set out the criteria for that. There could be sports teams of significance, so where they're, competing in nationally significant events. Could include diplomats, those who are involved in trade negotiations, for example. We've got a number of very significant trade negotiations happening at the moment. So we'll release more information on that within the next week or two. So
Cabinet is just going to, decide on a case-by-case basis, or are they going to put out a set of criteria as such?
No, we'll put out a set of criteria so that everybody understands exactly why people may be getting the vaccine at a given point in time.
And why is that not ready now?
Look, we've just had a few things to work through with that. We've already had some discussions on it, but we've just got a few things to finalise. One of the things that we're very mindful of is we don't want to create a system that can be gamed. So we've got to be very clear about what the criteria are. Make sure those criteria are sufficiently narrow that people can't game in the system.
Minister, before you go, this is on the levels, right? So in Auckland, we're still at level 2. When word of you coming on the program filtered out, we got this email from Andy. Bear with me here. Andy says they're getting married this weekend and they're shocked at the silence that has come from the government regarding the change in alert levels this week. Andy goes on to say, with this latest lockdown, I have no idea what their thinking is, meaning the government. We're in a position where we need to make a decision today if we will ask people not to come to our wedding, which is heartbreaking and importantly could be unnecessary. If you speak to the Minister today, I don't care about the vaccine in the coming months. I care about what's happening tomorrow or the day after, says Andy. Minister, can you speak to Andy, please?
Look, I absolutely feel for Andy. I feel for everybody who's had a wedding or a significant family event interrupted by our response to COVID-19. There will be a lot of people in that category. It can be often very heartbreaking for them. We've had people who haven't been able to attend the funerals of their loved ones because of COVID-19, and I absolutely feel for them. I do acknowledge that that's very, very difficult. We'll be making decisions tomorrow as a Cabinet on what happens to Auckland's alert levels on the basis of the best information that we have available. Our primary concern here is around making sure that we don't have COVID-19 out there spreading, because then there would be potentially more funerals and more tragic events.
What time, Minister, so Andy can put off a decision realistically? What time are you going to make that decision public after the discussion in Cabinet?
I imagine the Prime Minister will announce that fairly soon after. The Cabinet meeting is scheduled for tomorrow afternoon.
What time specifically?
I think the meeting itself is happening around 3:30, and then depending on how long that takes, I imagine the Prime Minister will make announcements late in the afternoon.
Appreciate your time this evening. That is COVID Response Minister Chris Hipkins there. It is almost 18 minutes past 5 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Keen for your feedback on that. Andy, do get in touch. Also, all of you out there, what do you think about the priority list and where you fit on it? You can text us on 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ or email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. The government's once again under pressure to adopt a two-way Trans-Tasman travel bubble. Australia's Prime Minister Scott Morrison says the country's ready for a reciprocal bubble arrangement and says New Zealand is missing out on much-needed tourism business. National is demanding the borders be reopened to Australia. Here's political reporter Charlie Drever.
Scott Morrison is making it crystal clear that when it comes to the Trans-Tasman bubble, the ball is in New Zealand's court.
If the New Zealand government doesn't wish Australians to visit Australia to New Zealand and spend money in Queenstown or Wellington or other parts of the country, that's a matter for them. It's always been a matter for them, and I'm happy for them to open it up as soon as the Prime Minister and a government would like to do that.
Mr Morrison says at the moment the one-way bubble is working in Australia's favour.
Australia is open to New Zealand and has been for some time, with the exception of a couple of brief pauses in that arrangement. That is benefiting our economy. It's benefiting particularly our travel and tourism industry and the aviation sector, which has been most hardly hit by the pandemic. But if Australians can't go to Queenstown, I'm hoping they're going to Cairns.
However, despite Australia being ready to go, the COVID-19 Response Minister Chris Hipkins couldn't say when a bubble would be in place when asked by National during Parliament's question time.
The timing around the opening of the travel bubble is a dynamic thing, and I cannot guarantee that it will be open by the end of the month.
Chris Hipkins says an agreement is yet to be reached between the two parties on what would happen to travellers if the safe travel zone is suspended.
We have to be in a position to provide some certainty about what will happen for those people in the event that the safe travel zone is suspended. It could well mean we have tens of thousands of people unable to travel home, and we need to be clear about what will happen in those circumstances.
But National's leader, Judith Collins, has a simple message for the government.
This opposition will hold the government to account on this. Open the borders, let people in.
She told the government visitors from across the ditch could be the key factor over whether tourism businesses survive and people keep their jobs.
It is no less safe for people to come from Sydney to Queenstown than it is for us Aucklanders to go to Queenstown, and this government won't accept it. And how much money do these pesky Australians spend on tourism? $60 billion. $60 billion.
But the Prime Minister is defending the decision to hold off on the two-way bubble.
As much as we absolutely appreciate just how hard hit our tourism sector has been, what I know they also want us to preserve is our reputation as a place that continues to operate with as many freedoms as possible.
Jacinda Ardern says she doesn't want to jeopardise those freedoms, but the government will continue to investigate the opportunity of having a bubble. From Parliament, for Checkpoint, Core Charlie Drever, DNA.
Warmer, wetter, windier and wilder, that's what Otago residents are being told to expect as part of a milestone report on climate change. The Otago Climate Change Risk Assessment maps out the projected risks for the region and details their implications for communities, the economy and the environment. In the long term, it'll mean an increase in intense rainfall events, drought, warmer waters, coastal erosion and inundation, reduced snowfall and extremely hot days. The report was first publicly aired during an Otago Regional Council meeting, which reporter Tess Brunton attended in Dunedin.
As a 420-page agenda item with 2 accompanying reports, the milestone study is a daunting read. But Otago Regional Councillor Michael Laws gave a simple summary.
It's going to get warmer, wetter, windier and wilder. And that's pretty much what we're going to tell our community, and then they're just going to get on with doing what the private sector does best, individuals, which is adapt.
No part of the Otago environment would remain unscathed, with all expected to be at extreme risk by 2090 if nothing is done. The Council's Operations General Manager, Gavin Palmer, says the report will aid future decisions.
The first step in taking action is to have an action plan, but you've really got to work out, what are we planning for? And so I think this piece of work helps us get, hopefully, a unified sense across Otago of what the future climate might look like, because we'll only adapt effectively if we're all planning for the same sort of thing.
The impact of climate change is on many residents' minds already. Simon Patterson co-owns Armidale Merino Stud in the Maniototo Plains, which relies on genetic breeding. He's in a better position than some other farms in the region.
We're not landlocked like some other farms could be potentially. If they lose one road, that's the only route in and out. I know some other farms around here, they've lost a couple of bridges, and that's substantially, just in these last floods, that's definitely added to costs as far as those bridges haven't been replaced yet, so they've got a lot of extra time on the road to get to their other farms.
In 2015, Dunedin was hit with a 1 in 100 year flood. South Dunedin Community Network Chair Eleanor Doig says her community is well aware of the climate change risks.
We know that a lot of here is at sea level, if not yet below it, but the salinity levels are rising. So there's a high awareness around here that things are going to have to change.
She worries that climate change won't hit everyone the same.
As the situation gets more and more dire, people who can afford to will go, or they will put in pumps and things in their properties, and the people who can't afford those things are going to experience increasingly damp houses and increasingly risks of flooding.
She doesn't want to see solutions dumped on communities and wants collaboration. More than 40 years ago, the Clutha township of Kelso was abandoned after 2 major floods and frequent flooding from the Clutha River catchment. Clutha District Mayor Brian Cadogan is certain other New Zealand communities will consider following Kelso's lead.
Will that happen in the Clutha district? We've got low-lying areas, the likes of Poonaware and parts of Taieri Mouth, that have to be ultra-conscious of the issues moving forward.
He says climate change is the issue of our generation and the government should be leading the charge. Gavin Palmer says the council is well aware of the flood risks around Otago and work is underway to mitigate that.
Climate change in Otago is a much bigger issue for Otago than sea level rise on the coast, and it's much bigger than flood risk comes into the areas of biodiversity and all those other things as well. So I think it just means that there's other things that we need to be thinking about when it comes to climate change, not just flood risk and not just sea level rise.
The Otago Regional Council is planning a public awareness campaign to ensure residents aren't in the dark about the results. In Dunedin for Checkpoint, Cortes Brunton, Tēnei.
Countdown workers are down on the vaccine priority list, along with others in high customer contact jobs like bus drivers. Supermarket staff are among the essential workers that kept on going through all the lockdowns and elevated alert levels. And Countdown stores have regularly featured as places of interest where customers have visited while infected with COVID, unwittingly putting workers at risk and under stress. I asked Countdown spokesperson Kitty Hannafin where she thinks her staff are ranked on the government's vaccine rollout list.
As I said, I guess most of our team, apart from those who we know are over 70 or who have an illness that we know is vulnerable to COVID, will be with the rest of the 2 million New Zealanders who are non-prioritised at the last.
So the very last group of people on the list?
Yes.
What do you think of that?
So I guess, Lisa, and like all New Zealanders, we totally support that the government needs to ensure prioritise border workers and their families and healthcare workers and our elderly and our most vulnerable. That makes complete sense to us, and we advocate and support that. But I guess, and this won't be any surprise, that I do think that there are parts of our business and some of our team who we think are essential workers, that we think are on the should be prioritised as well. And I guess that is because there's some of our stores that most New Zealanders know about that have been susceptible to COVID visits, and including our airport stores. and our checkout teams who are absolutely on the front line in those stores are at risk, I think, more so than some other general New Zealanders. But also we've got infrastructure in our business like distribution centres that if COVID did take hold in those would really jeopardise the supply of food across New Zealand. And for those reasons, I think, and for the enormous ongoing stress that it's caused many of our team, of course I'd advocate that our team are prioritised in some way, or at least some of our team.
So, just to be clear, you're not suggesting you want to elbow your way to the top of the queue. You basically accept the first 2.5 categories as being the right order, but you would like some of those key players in your business to be somewhere above the general category at the end.
That's right. It's not, I mean, I think that it just makes sense until you get to the kind of the 2 million citizens, and I guess before that, and I say this with the greatest respect to all of us who want that vaccine, probably some workers in some of our stores, not all of our stores, but some of our stores, particularly, for example, the stores near to the airport, which we had an incident again on Sunday night. Those checkout team, for example, or our workers in our distribution centre where the infrastructure is so critical to providing Kiwis with food, I would advocate that they are prioritised.
Do they feel vulnerable? How are they feeling?
Oh, our team feel very vulnerable. It's very hard work operating during COVID restrictions. It's really hard work and it's relentless and it's tiring. And I've spoken to you before about it. You know, that it's difficult dealing with customers, and we see a lot of aggression more than we usually see. And it is very tiring. It's very tough. And also our team is scared. So last week we had during COVID-3 in Auckland, we had our highest levels of absenteeism we've ever experienced, and that is absolutely down to exhaustion and fear and just tiredness. And what that means is, you know, it's hard for the rest of the team who are at work, and I don't blame people for staying at home, and we're asking them to stay home if they're sick, and I actually don't blame them for staying home if they're anxious either. So yeah, it's been a really tough year, but we don't want to push ahead at our place. We know what's right, but I would really support our team being some of our team at least being considered to be a priority in essential workers, frontline workers.
So it's no joke when you say that basically, well, it seems almost every COVID case has gone to a countdown at some point, because you've had to deep clean a number of supermarkets and you seem to have been drawn in to various clusters there. You stayed open during all of these lockdown levels, supplying New Zealanders with essential food and groceries. And I also recall that you made a significant donation of PPE to the health sector here. Are you feeling like you've done your bit, but, well, you've been let down in some way?
I definitely hope that we've done our bit, and we've been really proud to. We serve over 3 million Kiwis a week, and it's been great to be open to do that and to provide that sense of security. So, really proud, and we'll do it, again and again. But it's come at a very, big personal cost to our team, and I guess some recognition of that and to ease that would be great. I don't feel let down because I think our country's done so well, and I'm so proud to be part of that. But I really advocate strongly that our team are protected. I think they deserve it, Lisa. That's my view. They really deserve it, and they've showed and demonstrated day after day they're essential workers in our country.
How are we going to tell your team that they're not a priority in terms of this vaccination rollout?
I guess we're telling them now. I guess they would have seen the news today, but I'm sure they'll be very pleased that I'm speaking on their behalf now. And I know that we're reasonable people. We understand that there's people who need to go before us. Some of our team, as I say, who have been off work because they're unwell themselves and are at risk. But I'm sure they'll be disappointed. They will be disappointed because you know what, the best thing about it's been a grim year, but one of the things that they were so proud of was being seen. Actually being seen, not just workers in a checkout getting stuff through, but actually seen as essential and seen as heroes. And it's been so nice and deserved. And I guess now they must question whether or not that actually is the case, whether they are actually seen as essential. Because they are, and I think they are, and probably they won't feel so essential today.
Kiri, I know this is going to be a tough question to answer, but it is the reality. If you move up the rankings, someone has to move down. So if I look at this list, should you be ahead of healthy 65-year-olds, say, in the South Island?
As someone with elderly parents in the South Island, I'd have to say no. I think we can wait our turn after the 65 and 70-year-olds. But in terms of when you get to the 2 million, the last list where it says 2 million New Zealanders, the rest of the population, I think we could slip in above there.
And that's Countdown spokesperson Kiri Hannafin. Some people in South Auckland will be prioritised for the vaccine, but not everyone. Papatoetoe was the centre of the latest outbreak, so our reporter Alice Stewart and cameraman Simon Rogers headed there to gauge reaction to the rollout plan. They found some supported Countdown's view over prioritising their public-facing staff.
No, I think definitely there is a need for the frontline workers, which includes the supermarket workers and the service station workers, to be immunised before the rest of the population, I would say.
Why would that be?
Well, because they are at the front end dealing with people on a daily basis, as are the health professionals. So I think there's definitely a need for them to be prioritised.
And who would be next after that, do you think?
I mean, South Auckland appears to be an area of, interest at the moment. I mean, we've just had a big issue here. So I think we definitely need some sort of priority placed on South Auckland as well.
Oh, well, I think bus drivers and people who are involved with the public should be vaccinated early, yes. I mean, I know the older people are supposed to be vaccinated, but we are sort of not out and about so much as bus drivers, not coming up against the public so much.
They are like everybody else, like I said, yes, they are in the supermarkets, but we go in there as well, so are we not the same? Yes, they work there, but how about any other customer who go in there?
Basically, I think anyone who has immune disorders, they should be targeting people like that who are at risk, not necessarily just old people. I have an autoimmune disease and I have no immunity. So people with health issues, and I definitely think people in supermarkets, because they're essentially an essential worker as well. So yeah, they should definitely be offered it. Bus drivers, taxi drivers, anyone in public transport, yeah. What do you think about maybe people around South Auckland? Absolutely, because they could be at high risk because it's popped up here a few times. So I think they should look at geographically New Zealand and see where there's been, the South Island's virtually been not touched. So maybe leave them till last and focus on the areas that are high risk.
And that was Alice Stewart speaking to people in Papatoetoe. If you're listening to that on the radio, we'll put the video up on our Facebook page so you can watch it. Coming up on Checkpoint on RNZ National, the America's Cup is underway. We'll bring you the latest. And speaking of boats, why did a super yacht bringing major money to these shores get turned back? Immigration is with us. Plus, the new pay plan for Wellington bus drivers. We'd love your feedback on anything you've heard on the program so far. The vaccination list or anything else that takes your fancy, text us on 2101 or you can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ. Time now for the headlines with Susanna.
Rest home residents are next in line to be vaccinated against COVID-19. They will be followed by anyone over the age of 65 from May. COVID-19 Response Minister Chris Hipkins says government is targeting those most at risk of getting and spreading COVID-19 and those most at risk of getting seriously sick from it. But National Party leader Judith Collins says the rollout plan lacks detail. She claims that the booking system and online tool to check for eligibility are not yet ready. Meanwhile, Mr Hipkins says there are still details to be worked through before a two-way Trans-Tasman travel bubble is put in place. The Australian Prime Minister Scott Morrison says his country is ready for a two-way bubble, but is waiting on New Zealand. He says in the meantime, Australia will continue to benefit from the one-way bubble. Mr Hipkins says there needs to be more work done on what would happen to travellers if the safe travel zone is suspended. He says that could leave tens of thousands of people unable to travel home. Race 2 in the America's Cup series between Team New Zealand and Luna Rossa is underway. Team New Zealand comfortably beat the Italian syndicate by over half a minute in the earlier opening race. St John is encouraging people to learn CPR to help others survive cardiac arrest. A report by the ambulance service shows coronary artery disease is one of the biggest causes of death in New Zealand. Last year, St John medics treated more than 2,000 people for cardiac arrest, with only 31% surviving by the time they arrived at a hospital. Airways and Hawke's Bay Airport will begin talks as an independent report recommends that air traffic control services at the airport airport be retained. Last May, Airways New Zealand said it would cease operations at a number of regional traffic control towers, including Hawke's Bay. However, it later said it would reconsider the decision. Those are the latest news headlines on RNZ National. Our next news and weather update is at 6.
Thanks, Susanna. Kia ora anō, ko Lisa Owen Takuingwa, and this is Checkpoint. It is time for business news now with Nicholas Poynton. Nicholas, what is this first story you want to talk about? Temporary support measures for the financial system laid to rest.
Yeah, when the pandemic first reared its head, early stages of last year, the RBNZ introduced these temporary emergency measures. They were to ensure that there was plenty of cash sloshing around our financial system. And we've heard of the much heralded, large-scale asset purchase program, funding for lending, all these other measures like slashing the official cash rate. Well, there was also things like the term auction facility. Not sure many people would have heard of that. That allowed banks to borrow funds for up to 12 months using a broad range of collateral. And then the RBNZ also rolled out something that was called the Corporate Open Market Operation. That essentially provided a channel for banks to borrow funds to continue funding their corporate clients. So this is all about just ensuring that banks have the capital to keep supporting their customers, keep the big financial machine,
enough
keep it well
sloshing around for everyone.
Exactly, to keep the whole machine well lubricated. But the need for these temporary measures, those ones in particular, they've all but dried up. There's just been no one really been taking them up, and on that basis, the RBNZ has looked to really pull them back in and no longer offer them. And it's very much of a sign of just how well the economy has done in recovering from that initial shock of the lockdown. And also there's plenty of liquidity flowing around the system, supported by the large-scale asset purchase program, which is essentially bond buying, and also the big funding for lending program. ASB is one of the banks who've recently made an announcement about how it's going to use that system. So the RBNZ, it did mention that these measures, or pulling these measures, has not necessarily changed its stance on current monetary policy settings.
Who's this hospitality company that's on the buyout trail here?
Yeah, this is, they were formerly Moa Group, but since selling the brewery, they've since rebranded to be called Saver Limited. That says they look to move and focus strictly on its hospitality business. And they've snapped up a number of restaurants in Britomart from the Hip Group. They include the likes of Amano, Ortolana and The Store, brands I must say I'm not very familiar with, but I'm told that these are award-winning, attractive brands, attractive restaurants, very popular down in the Britomart area of Auckland. The company's paid about $11 million in total for these 3 venues, part of which is just straight up cash. About $1 million worth of it will be shares, and there's about $3 million that will be paid in about a year's time once the transaction has settled. And inquiring these new acquisitions, Saver Limited say they expect they will contribute about $3 million a year in terms of its operating revenue. And in the announcement to the stock exchange, they said that divestment from the brewery, which was a business that really did start the company, that's allowed it to focus on really growing the hospitality side of things. The brewer managed to be both loss-making and really expensive to run. So these acquisitions are really a step in that direction of growing what parts of the business actually make it money. The company did also announce today that they're going to look to raise about $6 million through offering shares to existing shareholders. And also combine that with the new debt facility, the company's going to have about $7 million on cash, on standby, that they say that they'll use to protect themselves against the likelihoods of future snap lockdowns, but also, perhaps more importantly for this company, given its strategy, is to go out and make more acquisitions in the future.
Okay, and what news do you have of the markets, Nicholas?
So the NZX is up by about 107 points to 12,252. The dollar is at 71.5 US cents and 93 Australian.
Thanks, Nicholas. Nicholas Poynton with business news there. The battle for the old mug is finally underway. Team New Zealand and Luna Rossa have kicked off the America's Cup on the Waitemata Harbour this afternoon. The event was delayed a few days because of the heightened COVID alert levels last week, but now it is all on. Our reporter Nick Trubridge is at the America's Cup fan village. Nick, what are the results so far?
Hi Lisa, yeah, well there's not much action down at the village itself, as you can see. People on radio, just to fill you in, there's no one here, it's level 2 in Auckland, but the action on the water is really hot. It's 1-1 in the America's Cup. Lisa, Team New Zealand of course taking the first race by about 31 seconds and Luna Rossa taking the second race by slightly less than that, so all tied up at the moment, Lisa.
So it's an actual competition, Nick.
It is an actual competition, and of course a lot of the commentary leading up to this was that Team New Zealand were going to be far faster than Luna Rossa. That hasn't been the case so far though. It's really quite even to some people's surprise.
Okay, so you mentioned the fact, obviously, we're all still in level 2 up here in Auckland, and people who are watching this will see a lonely-looking Nick Trubridge down there, a couple of people scattered in the background. Some nice-looking boats behind you, though, Nick. So what exactly is going on down there?
Lisa, there's not a lot going on, unfortunately. As you've just mentioned, Auckland is still at level 2. Behind me, there's a bar, GM Mum Bar, which would usually be absolutely packed out with people. There's no one here. And where I'm standing at the moment, this is where everyone would be watching the big screen just behind me. In fact, if there was a whole lot of people here, Lisa, they'd be shouting at me to tell me to get out of the way. I would be blocking their view. This is the reality of level 2 in Auckland. Of course, I'm assuming something that the organisers of this America's Cup were hoping to avoid, but there are a few boats out on the water, so there are still plenty of faces on the action, and you can imagine quite a few people watching at home. But as for down here, it is, it's deathly quiet, to be frank, Lisa.
Okay, so what is the schedule from this point, Nick?
Yeah, so there's racing every day through until the 17th of March, Lisa. Of course, 13 races in the series, so effectively it's first to 7. Whether or not we'll need the races all the way up to the 13th of March remains to be seen. Based on today, though, of course, it's 1-1. So if it does remain that tight, chances are we will see racing through until deep into the middle of March. Fingers crossed it does stay like that. I'm sure most people would like to see a competition, although some probably would like to see Team New Zealand win. But plenty more racing to come tomorrow, on Friday, and then into the weekend.
Thanks, Nick. That is Nick Trubridge, who's down there at the America's Cup fan village. Lonely on Nick Trubridge, with the occasional security guard wafting into shot there. As he mentioned, it's 1-1 at the moment. It is 16 minutes to 6. I'm Lisa Owen, and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. After 6, the NZOC on their hopes for the vaccine for Olympians. Just following the rules. That's immigration's explanation for denying visas to some of the crew on board a super yacht that was headed here for a mega refit worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. The 85-metre-long pleasure craft, Bold, is anchored at Fiji. The yacht has approval to enter New Zealand waters, but immigration's only granted 16 of the 23 crew visas, saying the other 7 are not essential. So Bold's considering heading to Australia instead, taking its business with it. Immigration New Zealand's National Border Manager, Peter Elms, explains why not everyone is invited.
Immigration rules mean that in those circumstances, the only people that are eligible to come to New Zealand are those people that are critical for the purpose of bringing the vessel into New Zealand waters. So it explicitly prevents non-critical crew and other crew who may be involved in non-sailing activities.
So, 23 people on board as we understand it. 7 didn't meet that criteria. Give us an example of someone, of a role on that ship that you said, no, they don't qualify.
So that's right. So 23 crew were applied to come in. We granted visas to 16 of those crew. So 16 of the crew were deemed to be essential for the operation of the vessel. So those 16 crew had roles that were involved in motoring that vessel to New Zealand. The 7 crew that were declined the opportunity were passenger-related crew. So they were stewards. They were steward-related jobs. Their jobs entailed looking after the interior of the vessel and looking to the needs of passengers on the vessel.
Isn't a ship a kit in its parts? It's those people on board, the 23 on board, complete the ship and its operations.
Well, the 23 on board complete the ship for normal operations, but this is not normal operations. So what we're saying here is that the approval by the DG of Health is purely to bring that vessel from point A to point B for the purpose of repair and refit. So that's not normal operations. Normal operations would be there'd be passengers on board that vessel. They would be cruising and doing domestic-like functions. We're not expecting that of the vessel. The vessel is purely there to be brought to New Zealand.
Are we cutting off our nose to spite our face here? Because this ship was going to bring significant business to a marine industry that is struggling at the moment. And for the sake of 7 people, that money is now going elsewhere. Does that make sense?
But this is government policy. So immigration's role in this is really just to regulate government policy.
Do you see a flaw in that, though?
No, government policy is pretty strict. You know, the border's been closed in New Zealand for some time now, and we've seen the benefits of that closure. So it's a difficult job sometimes to make these judgment calls, but at the end of the day, we've got to err on the side of caution, and caution says that actually the New Zealand border is closed unless you meet one of the very strict criteria which allows you to enter. In this particular case, immigration followed absolutely the rules, the policy that's laid down by the government. The government policy does not allow for non-essential crew or passengers to come on board these vessels across the maritime border. And let's face it, there are many, many people...
But non-essential crew is a subjective term, isn't it, Peter? It's what you regard as essential or not. Some people might say the stewards keeping the condition of the ship top inside are essential. So there would seem to be a little bit of flexibility at the very least.
And there is a little bit of flexibility, absolutely, Lisa. And I'll tell you now that immigration are very used to using flexibility and using...
So did you try your very best to get the ship and the crew here, or did you take the opportunity to, scupper it?
No. So let's look at the facts. A ship of this nature, by law, has a minimum safe manning certificate. So a minimum safe manning certificate is required by legislation, by the Safety of Life at Sea Act. Now, that minimum safe manning certificate for this vessel said that they need 8 crew members, and it identifies the role of those 8 crew members. So what immigration have done is we've used that information, we've exercised a degree of discretion, and said, actually, we're quite happy with 16 crew members, which will go over and above, giving us assurance that they can safely bring that vessel to New Zealand. Those 16 positions are actually sailing positions. They're all involved in the mechanics of bringing that vessel to New Zealand. The 7 other positions are simply not, and I don't think anybody who would look at this situation would deem them to be essential crew.
What are you protecting the New Zealand public from in denying them entry? They have been, they claim, isolating on the ship in their own bubble. So what is it we're being protected from by not allowing this ship and the full crew of 23 in?
Well, the government's border policies there are there to protect New Zealanders. So they're there to...
But I'm talking about the specific, Peter, and I am sorry to interrupt, but I'm not talking about the general principle of keeping the country safe. We're looking at a specific example where they say they've been isolating as a bubble of 23 on the ship for some time. And obviously the trip from Fiji takes time on top of that, where they're in isolation. So specifically, what are you protecting the New Zealand public from by denying this crew, the entire crew, entry?
So let's remember that policies are not about, they're not written for individual circumstances. They're written for the array of maritime vessels that might want to come to New Zealand. Immigration's role in this is to make sure that the government policy is implemented. And that's what we're doing. And the government policy basically says that you cannot come to New Zealand or enter New Zealand via the maritime border unless there's some very tight requirements about why you're being allowed entry. Now,
but can you see, Peter, how one government department may be undermining the objectives of another government department? And by that I mean immigration undermining a decision from the Ministry of Health, because the Ministry of Health has given an exemption to get a refit. They won't come here unless they have the 23 crew. You're denying some of those crew entry. Can you see how some people might look at that and see it as complete idiocy?
Well, I think what people need to realise is that the Ministry of Health process and the immigration process are separate. So the Ministry of Health process purely looks at the health risks associated with bringing a vessel to New Zealand, whether that's a foreign flagged vessel, whether it's a New Zealand vessel. So that's what they're concerned about. They make it absolutely crystal clear to people that if there are foreign nationals on that vessel, they need to meet the immigration requirements for entry to New Zealand.
And that's Immigration New Zealand's National Border Manager, Peter Elms there. And while we were having that conversation, a lot of you have got on the feedback to get in touch with us. Sandy says New Zealand government scaredy cats, too rigid and lack of flexibility. They should let the boat in for the work and the money it brings. Also, seasonal workers should have been let in for an exchange earning fruit rotting on the ground. It's a win-win for New Zealand and the islands, but this government hasn't got the mettle or the guts. Ken says dumbest decision ever not letting this ship in, but Frank has a completely different view. Frank says our borders are closed, make an exemption and you'll have a queue from here to Australia wanting to come in. Meanwhile, pandemic, says Frank. Thanks for your feedback. Do keep it coming. Text us on 2101 or tweet us at CheckpointRNZ. Papua New Guinea has granted regulatory approval for the COVAX facility to deliver the AstraZeneca COVID-19 vaccine in the country. The government is preparing for the vaccine rollout to begin by April, but as Johnny Blades reports, it can't come soon enough for a country struggling to contain the spread of the virus.
PNG's total number of confirmed COVID cases is surging towards 2,000. Around 800 new cases have been reported in the past 5 weeks. A lot of them are health workers. Health Minister Jelta Wong says the training of frontline staff to administer the vaccine is getting underway.
We want all our nurses and frontliners all trained up before the vaccine comes so that we can roll straight out. The first lot of vaccine, we are probably looking in about 2 to 3 weeks' time when it lands here. And we should have our staff trained well enough to go to other areas to make sure that the frontliners are vaccinated.
The government has its work cut out for it to get accurate information to the public about a vaccine approved by the WHO and currently being used in Europe, the UK and India. PNG is not making the vaccine compulsory. The Health Minister acknowledged PNG is grappling with a hotbed of misinformation about the vaccine in the public domain, even among health professionals.
With the doctors that are saying that the vaccine is not good or they shouldn't use the vaccine or they're using Bill Gates or 666 or all these things, I find that very irresponsible of them. They should be trying to minimize as much damage as we can. Even if you don't want to take it, at least we have it here in the country for people that want to take it.
PNG has several concerning hotspots where the virus outbreak is surging. The Prime Minister, James Marape, says transmission in the capital, Port Moresby, is believed to be widespread. The second biggest city, Lae, is in lockdown. Far-flung Bougainville has registered dozens of cases in the past week, while provinces along the border with Indonesia have hundreds. The governor of one of these provinces, West Sepik, Tony Wawau, says a number of causal factors are at play.
Because of this season, so much rain and cold, and it gives a fair chance for the virus to, spread so quickly. We have a lot of cases coming up, but we don't have enough testing going on in the province. That's not enough at the moment. At the moment, we need more testing so that we can get the whole entire, or maybe at least 1/3 of the population tested. And we could be able to know how many are now positive cases in the province.
Meanwhile, thousands of people have been gathering in the capital over the past 2 weeks, mourning the recent loss of the country's founding father, Sir Michael Somare, who died almost 2 weeks ago. The governor of Oro, Gary Juffa, urged Papua New Guineans to observe protective measures as they attend the daily house cries, traditional mourning events for Sir Michael.
Community transmission of COVID is very high in Port Moresby right now as we speak, or in NCDC. And, new cases have been emerging every day. So I want to ask you all to be very mindful of this when we are representing our province and paying our respects to the Somare family and the people of Sepik.
Gary Juffa also revealed he recently had the coronavirus, one of several MPs to have tested positive. He's been clear of COVID for about a fortnight, before which he was sick for 3 weeks. But he says COVID-19 is real and dangerous, so the public must be careful to protect themselves. For Checkpoint, Johnny Blades.
A proposal is being put forward that would see all Wellington bus drivers paid at least the living wage. Around half of all bus drivers in the region are currently paid below that threshold, some as low as $19 an hour. Our Wellington reporter Harry Locke and video journalist Dom Thomas have the story.
A number of services across town were cancelled today, as around 200 drivers parked their buses and filtered into a community hall in suburban Wellington for the Tramways Union meeting. But amid the usual items on the agenda was one that stood out a bit different.
The Regional Council's proposal to fund the living wage for all members from the 19th of April. We've still got some minor details to work out around that. We're meeting them again next week. But the main thing is that it's a definite proposal, and it's good news for our members.
Kevin O'Sullivan is the secretary of the Wellington branch of the Tramways Union. He believes the pay rise will tackle long-standing concerns with the industry, such as staff shortages.
Yeah, it's absolutely significant. So people are leaving the industry, and it will help address a lot of issues, just apart from take-home pay.
The living wage is currently set at $22.10 per hour, but around half of all Wellington bus drivers earn below that. It means that for more than 300 drivers, today's announcement will signal a pay rise, which the transport network Metlink hopes will happen by mid to late April. Scott Gallagher is Metlink's general manager.
It is quite exciting. It has been some time coming with us working with the operators, unions and drivers, and we're just really chuffed that we can let people know that we are going to be addressing the living wage gap.
The Living Wage campaign has been pushing for government and local authorities to ensure all staff and contractors are paid at least the living wage. The campaign's national chair, Gina Lockyer, says it makes a real difference.
So when people are earning below the living wage, there are many difficulties that they face, lots of different choices around whether they need to work more hours just in order to make basic costs like rent. And we know that when people are paid the living wage, those barriers, those choices are opened up.
She says the council making such a decision sets an example for other companies and indeed other councils to follow suit. How much it will cost overall and exactly where the money will come from is still being worked out. Gallagher says the funding of the pay increase will be a partnership between both the Regional Council and Waka Kotahi, the transport agency. The Minister for Transport, Michael Wood, says conversations are ongoing in other regions.
Well, I've been meeting with unions, with employers and with Waka Kotahi over recent weeks to look at how we can move towards a wider rollout of the living wage in the sector, and I'm hopeful we'll make further progress within the year.
Meanwhile, Scott Gallagher of Metlink acknowledges there is plenty more work to do.
I'm looking forward to working with our operators, our drivers, our unions over the next 12 to 24 months to work through all of the other issues that might be in play that people want us to work on.
The pay bump is not yet set in stone. The Regional Council will vote on whether to set the wheels in motion by the end of the month. In Te Whanganui Atara, for Checkpoint, Harry Locke.
And you can check out Harry's video online. And speaking of bus drivers, Danny's got in touch about the vaccine strategy. Danny says, I'm a bus driver. Internationally, it's been shown that most likely people to catch COVID are health workers, supermarket workers, cleaners, bus drivers and taxi drivers. Numerous bus drivers have died in the UK from COVID. Buses are acknowledged vectors. We should get priority for the vaccine.
RNZ News at 6, ngā mihi nui ko Susana Leatawa tēnei. The America's Cup is level at one race all after challengers Luna Rossa beat Team New Zealand in race 2 of the series in Auckland. Team New Zealand comfortably won the first race by over half a minute, but the Italians turned the tables in race 2. The challengers led by 25 seconds at the midpoint, but Team New Zealand cut the lead to just 12 seconds on the final upwind leg. However, Luna Rossa managed to hang on over the sprint home, winning by 7 seconds. The next 2 races in the first 2-7 series are on Friday. Immigration New Zealand says it refused 7 people permission to come to New Zealand aboard a super yacht because they were not essential marine crew. The luxury vessel was the largest of 30 super yachts approved by the government to visit for the America's Cup. Jill Bonnet reports.
The 85-metre-long pleasure craft, Bold, was coming from Fiji with more than 20 people on board, including the vessel's German owner. Immigration New Zealand says the vessel was granted permission to arrive because of a proposed refit and refurbishment, reportedly costing $750,000. But 7 crew were refused border exemptions as they had mainly passenger-facing roles, not meeting the criteria of being part of its required operation. The super yacht is now heading instead to Australia. Ko Jill Bonnet.
The Director-General of Health says the planning for how the COVID-19 vaccine will be rolled out to the wider population is still underway. The government has released the details of the campaign to vaccinate priority and at-risk groups over the next few months. Vaccines are then likely to be available for all New Zealanders over 16 from July. Dr. Ashley Bloomfield says they're still working through how best to manage the wider rollout.
We're putting thought into the best way to use the capacity in the system, and that could be thinking about doing it on a regional basis. At the peak, we will need hundreds, if not 1,000 or 2,000 additional vaccinators, while there is background vaccination happening through, for example, general practice, or it could be at pharmacy or through Māori and Pacific providers. So it will be a combination.
The Director-General of Health, Ashley Bloomfield. Supermarket giant Countdown believes some of its workers, including those in food distribution, should get the COVID-19 vaccination earlier. Health workers, the elderly and vulnerable are the next in line under the government's rollout plan. Supermarket workers will be the last to be vaccinated along with the general population. Countdown spokesperson Kitty Hannafin has told Checkpoint that's tough to swallow for those who kept working under trying conditions during successive lockdowns.
We've got infrastructure in our business like distribution centres that if COVID did take hold in those would really jeopardise the supply of food across New Zealand.
However, Kitty Hannafin says staff don't want to push ahead of the more deserving. The National Party is telling the government to hurry up and open the borders to Australia. Australia's Prime Minister Scott Morrison says the country is ready for that bubble, and in the meantime New Zealand will miss out on much needed tourism business. Nationals leader Judith Collins says she can't understand why the government is dragging its feet.
We've got the Australian government able to take New Zealanders to go and spend money in Australia or work in Australia, and we can't do the same. And what I'm seeing from Scott Morrison is a leader who knows how to lead.
Judith Collins says Tourism NZ estimates the bubble, combined with domestic tourism, would see tourism spend return to 70% of pre-COVID levels. Australia is well behind its target for COVID-19 vaccinations. About 100,000 people have so far been inoculated, but authorities wanted to have 4 million vaccinated by the end of this month. Sean Bindley reports.
The vaccine rollout has been criticised, with inoculation rates much lower in Australia than in many other countries. Although delivery of 250,000 doses of the AstraZeneca vaccine was blocked by the Italian government last week. Australia's Chief Medical Officer, Professor Brendan Murphy, says he's confident the jab is being delivered in a timely fashion.
We are taking it as quickly and carefully and safely as we can. We're not like the US or the UK or most other countries in the world where they've got people in hospital dying. We can take our time, set up our systems, do it safely and carefully.
In Brisbane, I'm Sean Bindley.
One person has been found dead and another with critical injuries at a house in Pukekohe. Auckland police say the injured man was found at 9 this morning and taken to Middlemore Hospital. He remains in a critical condition. The other person's body was found while the police were checking the scene. The death is being treated as unexplained and a post-mortem will be carried out tomorrow. A scene examination is underway and a guard will remain in place overnight. It's coming up to 5 minutes past 6. The America's Cup is level at 1-1 after the first day of racing on the Hauraki Gulf. Team New Zealand won the opening race by 31 seconds, while Luna Rossa took the second by 7 seconds. The start was the defining moment in each race. Luna Rossa helmsman Jimmy Spittle told TVNZ he was happy to show how competitive they are.
Yeah, I thought the boys sailed a great race then. We had obviously quite a lot of manoeuvres, quite a lot of tacks. And yeah, just kept the boat going well, so it was a good sign of strength, I thought, to bounce back after that first one.
The next 2 races are on Friday. Former All Black Sonny Bill Williams has confirmed his rugby career in both league and union is finally over. The 35-year-old has told 9 News in Sydney that he now wants to focus on becoming a world champion boxer. Roger Federer is targeting a 3rd Olympic medal at the Tokyo Games this year after missing out in 2016 due to injury. Federer is set to return to the court this week at the Qatar Open after 13 months on the sidelines with a knee problem. The 39-year-old's not played since losing at last year's Australian Open semi-final match. Federer has played at 4 Olympic Games, winning gold for Switzerland in men's doubles in 2008 and a single silver medal in 2012. Porto have upset Juventus to reach the Champions League football quarter-finals on away goals after a 4-4 aggregate draw. That's the news.
Tonight on Nights, Seamus Johnson from the Wellington band Seamouse is in for a sofa session.
Lisa Clooney talks about her exhibition Wetland, celebrating Northland's Hikurangi Swamp, which she lives next door to, and lamenting that so many of our wetlands have been drained dry. And this week's Hump Prize is John Hellerman's book, A Biker's Tale, about his adventures cycling the length of the country on nights of me, Brian Crump, afternoon news at 7 on RNZ National.
Now, the short forecast from Met Service to midnight tomorrow. Northland to Manawatu, including Coromandel, Bay of Plenty and Central High Country. Showers turning to rain for a time, heavy falls and thunderstorms possible. Gisborne and Hawke's Bay, cloud increasing, rain developing tonight or tomorrow morning. Horowhenua to Wellington, also Wairarapa, isolated showers, turning to rain for a time tonight and again tomorrow morning, clearing tomorrow night. Marlborough and Nelson, rain clearing this evening, then cloudy periods, isolated showers about the ranges tomorrow. For Bulla to Fiordland, partly cloudy with isolated showers, clearing and becoming fine in Fiordland tonight and elsewhere tomorrow. Canterbury and Otago, rain easing to a few showers tonight, clearing tomorrow and becoming fine. Southland, showers clearing overnight, generally fine tomorrow. And Chatham Islands, mostly cloudy with a period of rain tomorrow. RNZ National, it's coming up to 8 minutes past 6.
Thanks, Susanna. If you're just joining us, this is Checkpoint and I'm Lisa Owen. 2 million New Zealanders will be vaccinated against COVID-19 by July under the government's latest plans. And everyone over 65 will be eligible from May. The COVID Response Minister, Chris Hipkins, has outlined plans covering about half the eligible population, but does leave some gaps. Health correspondent Ron Quinn reports.
Chris Hipkins has given the clearest plan yet of who gets a shot when. 18,000 border workers or those who live with them have now had their first jab. The COVID-19 Response Minister says it's been a balancing act deciding who comes next.
These are the New Zealanders most at risk of getting and spreading COVID-19 and those most at risk of getting seriously sick from it. Our plan also has a focus on those who live and work in places where they're most likely to pick up COVID-19.
Frontline healthcare workers at risk of catching COVID have long been signalled as a priority. Now, another 180,000 health staff at risk of giving vulnerable people the disease are next in line. They include people working in prisons, hospices and with homeless people. And those living in residential care, including old people's homes, are high on the list too.
We've seen the devastating impact that outbreaks in residential care facilities can have here and overseas. That's why this group of New Zealanders will start getting vaccinated later this month.
Older people living with family also fall into that category. The people they live with can get the jab too. And some people in South Auckland are being prioritised, anyone over 65 and people with relevant health conditions living in the area. Chris Hipkins stopped short of prioritising the whole of South Auckland, saying many who live there will fall into other categories, like the families of border workers.
We're talking about those who are more at risk because of their relevant health conditions. So we want them to be first before we move on to the broader population there.
Next up, it's all remaining older folk. The Director General of Health, Ashley Bloomfield, says from the start of May those over 65 will be in line, along with those with underlying health conditions that make them vulnerable to the virus. That's 750,000 people.
There'll be a range of ways whereby people will be able to either book online themselves or they will be contacted by provider. It might be their GP or a Māori or Pacific provider. There will also be opportunities for just walk up, walk in.
As for Olympians and cricketers anxious to know if they'll get the vax before they go offshore, they'll have to wait. Cabinet will decide in a week or two how to prioritise those who need a vaccination for compassionate or nationally significant reasons.
National significance is not just sports teams that we're talking about here. We're also talking about diplomats who have to travel overseas, trade negotiators, a variety of other, national interest groups. And again, before we absolutely set all of that out, I want to get my Cabinet colleagues to go through that carefully.
Under 16s aren't eligible for a jab, but Dr Bloomfield says they're watching overseas evidence carefully, with Pfizer already compiling data.
Should the data and evidence come through, we have enough vaccine to vaccinate the under 16 population in accordance with what the trial data will be showing.
The government's plan is dependent on Pfizer delivering vaccines as planned, with the fourth batch enough for about 30,000 people arriving yesterday. And Mr Hipkins says all other New Zealanders should be able to start getting shots from July and hopes the whole country will be done by the end of the year. Mō te hōtaka o te ahiahi, ko Rowan Quinn tēnei.
And just a note of clarification regarding our interview with the COVID-19 Response Minister, Chris Hipkins, earlier. The Minister said Cabinet is meeting at 3:30 tomorrow to consider whether to move Auckland to Alert Level 1. He said an announcement would be made in the afternoon after that meeting. However, his office has been in touch and has clarified the levels announcement will actually be made on Friday. As you heard, at the moment there's no special priority group for high-performance athletes like the Black Caps or our Olympians. The government says it's still thrashing out the details of a national significance category. This is for the priority in vaccination. But the clock is ticking down for those needing to leave the country to compete. New Zealand Olympic Committee Chief Executive Kieran Smith says they'd like the team to be vaccinated before they go to Tokyo, but so far they've been given no government guarantees.
Our conversations have been ongoing for a while, and mainly through a working group that we participate in along with Paralympics New Zealand in terms of their ambitions, and also with Sport New Zealand and high performance sport. And that group have been looking at what are the needs for travel for international sport this year, with a particular eye on the Olympics and Paralympics. So we've been feeding into that process, and it's always been our consistent request that if it was possible, we think it would be really timely for the athletes to get the vaccination prior to the Games. And also that's something that internationally the IOC have been promoting and requesting, provided it's within, I guess, the priorities of each individual country.
The government has made it clear it's working on a category for people who are nationally significant. Are the Olympians nationally significant? Should they be approved under that category?
Well, I mean, having not seen what particular parameters the government are considering there, I don't actually.
But what's your feeling? What's your feeling, Kieran, generally?
My feeling is that to be selected to go in the Olympic team, you have to demonstrate, by your international performances that you're capable of being top 16 in the world. So you are amongst, a pretty high-performing group of individuals and have been training and, preparing for many, many years. So my view is that pretty special New Zealanders. They're going off to represent us and, on the high-performance stage. So I certainly think that they are of national significance. And over the years, in fact, we know that research has proven the role of the Olympic Games in terms of nation building, our social fabric, and how New Zealand is perceived on the world stage.
So given that you think they are nationally significant, would you be comfortable with them jumping ahead in the queue?
Well, I'm not sure that it is ahead of the queue. I mean, as I mentioned earlier, the Olympic Games are not starting until late July. The situation for most of the athletes at the moment, this year, unusually, most of our athletes are here in New Zealand. Frequently they're coming from all parts of the world, but because international competition has stopped and there's a lot of Kiwis have come home, most of them are here. So we would anticipate that within the program that was mentioned today, that getting athletes timely access before they leave in July would seem to be a possibility.
But according to the priority list, the general population, 2 million, that vaccination for that group only starts at the beginning of July. So if they fell into that group, it may not be soon enough. So they would potentially have to move ahead of the category that they naturally fall into.
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, I don't know all the details of the various priorities, and obviously the government will establish that, but I would have thought that if they are determined to be in this national significant category, and we're talking probably around about 200 athletes, that would seem to be a possibility before the end of June, given that by that time, if I'm reading correctly, I think half of the population otherwise would be expected to be vaccinated by that time. So I'm feeling that it's a possibility, and I certainly hope, for our athletes and their families and their friends and others that they are able to achieve that access.
Are there some athletes who wouldn't go to the Olympics unless they could get the vaccination?
We haven't heard that. I think that these athletes, bearing in mind they're quite a diverse group, they represent some 25 different sports and, are kind of all ages and ethnicities and backgrounds. And, all of them without fail have been training for years for this moment, and their parents and, and mums and dads and sponsors have supported them to do that. So they're very, very determined to get there and very motivated to have, probably once in a lifetime opportunity. So my sense is that athletes would generally be comfortable with the vaccine and would see that as a way to protect themselves and enable them to compete. I mean, there's nothing worse than if you were to go into that environment and, you did get COVID or you're a close contact or whatever the case may be and weren't able to realise that dream.
So, Kieran, in all honesty, are you absolutely convinced that these games are going ahead?
Well, we're in the middle of a global pandemic, so, nothing is absolutely certain 100%, but I'm absolutely confident in the pathway that I see that is being shared with us, the work that we're doing, the IOC are doing, Tokyo are doing. I'm confident that the Games will go ahead and that I'm obviously not involved in the Paralympics so much, but certainly from an Olympic point of view, we are planning that our athletes will be there in July, August 2021.
Now, have you been guaranteed spots in managed isolation quarantine on return?
No, we're working through that. I mean, gosh, it's one of those many complicating factors at the moment. So we've been working through that with government in terms of, the size of the team and when they compete and how that might work. So that's still a conversation point.
So are you going to have to stagger returns in order to get those spots, or are they going to ring fence 200 places for you? Plus? No, we would anticipate staggered. In fact, one of the countermeasures, of which there's many, but one of the countermeasures that's been introduced for the Games this time round is that there's a limited stay in the village, a restricted stay in the Olympic Village. So an athlete is only able to go into the village 5 days before they compete and need to leave within 48 hours of their competition. So we would anticipate a reasonably steady stream of athletes and team members coming back to New Zealand. And that's Karen Smith from the NZOC there. On the streets of Whangarei, some are wary of any vaccine rollout, citing a lack of information. But others are counting down the days until they get their shot. But say supermarket workers and others on the front line should be further up the order.
Oh, absolutely. Where would we have been if we didn't have our little shops open during the COVID lockdown? Without those people, they are essential. They need to have their vaccine. If we go down into a big lockdown again, at least we know that they've been vaccinated. I can't wait for it myself, but no, they should have the vaccine as soon as the border people do. Not happy then with that news.
Yeah, I think they should. I mean, these are people which have been at the forefront of some of the difficult times being open during lockdown. I suppose if that happens again, at least then they can be covered during them periods of time. Yeah.
I don't know, I'm not personally interested in the vaccine, so I haven't been following it too closely.
It's fair, I guess. Yeah, I don't know, my mum, she's all against it and all that stuff, so she keeps telling me not to get it and all that stuff, but no, I reckon they should be the same as everyone else. I don't know why they have to wait.
I feel as if it's prioritised towards many that do suffer long-term or respiratory problems.
I think that the border ones and the frontline people definitely need to be done first. So no, I'm confident what plan they've come up with. Yeah.
And that was people on the streets of Whangarei, and a few people have been getting in contact about the vaccine priorities list. Steph says vaccination rollout plan sounds pragmatic and sensible. They've got this. Let's remember we are in a fortunate and safe position. Another listener says, definitely agree with the countdown spokesperson. Essential workers should go before the rest of the public. They're at higher risk of exposure and took one for the team of 5 million during lockdown. Other side of the coin, though, this person says, I totally disagree that supermarket workers should be vaccinated before teachers, factory workers, council workers, meat workers. Just join the queue. And this listener says, vaccinate supermarket workers before cricketers. We can't eat sport. It is 21 minutes past 6 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. A trial is underway for a man accused of shooting a man 3 times in the head before storing the body in a chest freezer. The Crown opened its case against J. Christopher Lingman, who was accused of fatally shooting Denver Chance in February 2019. Jean Bell reports from the High Court in Auckland, and a warning, this story may disturb some listeners.
Denver Chance was last seen on the 24th of February 2019. He told friends at his flat in Mairangi Bay that he was popping out and will be back soon. His body was found 2 weeks later at a property in Kingseat, south of Auckland. Mr. Lingman has pleaded not guilty to murder and pleaded guilty to 3 charges of possession of drugs, including cocaine and MDMA, for supply. It is the Crown's case that Mr. Chance went to visit Mr. Lingman and was murdered. Crown prosecutor Gareth Case says 3 bullets were fired at Mr. Chance's head and his body was put in a freezer.
Following the killing, the defendant went and purchased a chest freezer. He put Denver Chance's body into that chest freezer and left him there for the next 2 weeks until police found him exactly 2 years ago today in that chest freezer.
The Crown says Mr. Lingman used a chainsaw in order to fit Mr. Chance's body in the freezer. Crown prosecutor Gareth Case says Mr. Lingman attempted to clean up the blood using a water blaster and bleach, but luminol testing revealed blood stains.
The forensic scientist's opinion is that the area of probable blood staining was likely caused by the movement of a blood-stained item along the ground. The Crown says that blood-stained item was the deceased, Denver Chance. The defendant dragged him from the front steps where he was shot and killed, along the driveway there and into the carport, before placing him in the freezer the following day.
Mr. Lingman's defence lawyer, Stephen Lack, says both men were drug dealers. Mr. Chance had a history of drug offences and would import drugs, mostly cocaine, and sell them to Mr. Lingman, who would sell them on further. The defence says Mr. Chance believed Mr. Lingman was ripping him off and was angry. They say Mr. Chance was armed with a shotgun when he came to Mr. Lingman's house, whilst the accused had a rifle.
Mr. Lingman made another attempt to try and reason with Mr. Chance and resolve the situation. But in that split second, Mr. Chance raised the shotgun as if to aim it towards him. Mr. Lingman fired a volley of shots in Mr. Chance's direction, some striking Mr. Chance, others hitting either the front door or the area surrounding the front door.
The defence say Mr. Lingman only fired his weapon in self-defence.
But what's critical is that Mr. Lingman was left with no choice in that moment but to fire his weapon. If he didn't fire his weapon, then there can be no doubt, I suggest, that he would have been killed instantly if he had been struck by a shot from the shotgun that Mr. Chance was holding, no doubt.
The Crown argued the shooting was not self-defence and firing 3 shots was not reasonable use of force. The trial before a jury of 8 men and 4 women continues. Mō te hōtaka o te ahi nei, ko Jean Bell tēnei.
The BAFTAs are the UK's equivalent of the Oscars, and like their Hollywood cousins, they've been criticised for a lack of diversity. But things are changing, with 2/3 of this year's nominees coming from minority communities. There's also a first, with 4 women up for Best Director. Here's the BBC's Will Gompertz.
Nomadland jointly leads BAFTA's 2021 shortlist, its most multicultural ever, with 7 nominations, including one for its director, Chloe Zhao, and a leading actress nod for Frances McDormand.
Hello, coffee?
She is a big star. Bouquet Bakre, another nominee for leading actress, is not yet. Hers was an eye-catching performance in Rocks, a beautifully observed film about growing up in East London, which also sees Kauthar Ali shortlisted for Best Supporting Actress and nominations for both its director and screenwriters.
Were you expecting that?
No, we are bowled over. I can't believe it. Were we expecting it, Teresa?
No, we were hopeful.
I think we are at a time where people are beginning to wake up to different stories, which, thank God, they've always been there and they've always been worth telling.
Wouldn't only toilet soil for so long without seeing a harvest. And I think this is the beginning of harvest season for so many people, way beyond I got into this industry, who have been working for so long.
What do I do for a living?
The dark comedy come thriller Promising Young Woman has 6 nominations, including one for its British writer and director Emerald Fennell.
I want to share something.
Judas and the Black Messiah's Dominique Fishback is among the supporting actress nominees, while Daniel Kaluuya, who plays Fred Hampton, leader of the Chicago Black Panther Party, gets a supporting actor nod.
Fist up!
Along with Clark Peters in Spike Lee's Da Five Bloods.
If my daddy had known I was going to turn out...
Chadwick Boseman, who died of colon cancer last year, receives a posthumous leading actor nomination for his performance in Ma Rainey's Black Bottom. He is one of 16 of the 24 actors shortlisted who comes from an ethnic minority group, which is quite a turnaround from last year, when there were none.
We can only judge what's entered, but what we did do is make sure there was a more level playing field, that more films were watched by more members, and therefore a greater variety and range of films and performances have been recognised.
I'm not leaving my flat!
Anthony Hopkins gets a leading actor nod for his portrayal of an elderly man suffering from dementia in The Father, a British movie that is also shortlisted for the prestigious Best Film Award in a BAFTA shortlist quite unlike any other.
And that was Will Gompertz with that report. The White House has confirmed one of President Biden's dogs bit someone, but denies he's in exile. Jenny Moos has more on Major Biden and the misbehaviour of the first dog.
First he's in the White House, now he's in the doghouse, the subject of biting questions.
And did he bite somebody?
And personality analysis.
A bit on the wild side, that he barks, that he's been known to charge.
And now the White House has confirmed.
On Monday, the first family's younger dog, Major, was surprised by an unfamiliar person and reacted in a way that resulted in a minor injury to the individual, which was handled by the White House medical unit.
3-year-old Major bit a security person? Biden's dog, not such a good boy after all. Twitter rushed to defend him. I hope that you know you're still a very good boy, even though you made a mistake. Both Major, acquired from his shelter, and the much older Champ were sent back to the Bidens' home in Delaware, but the White House insisted that was pre-planned because Jill Biden was on the road. The First Lady said recently,
I've been obsessed with getting our dog settled.
Lots of new people and stuff at the White House to agitate a young dog.
They have to take the elevator. They're not used to that. They have to go out on the South Lawn with lots of people watching them.
And so much attention.
Another dog's question, okay?
It was a doozy asked by the New York Post.
Can you also reassure the public that Major Biden will not be euthanized as a result of this?
Well, certainly Major Biden is a member of the family, so I can assure you that.
She said the dogs will be back at the White House soon. Remember when President George W. Bush's dog, Barney, bit a reporter?
Ooh! Did it get you? I got bit by Barney.
The president's daughter, Jenna, later said,
Barney was a real jerk.
Wow. Instead of calling Major a jerk, fans are tweeting, "Free Major," even if he did mistake a person for a chew toy or a tennis ball. He's still got his master's ear.
And that was Jenny Moos. On the Superyacht, someone's got in touch to say our border is not closed. We have cricketers here and others that come and go. Immigration New Zealand, they need to lose the "we are the regulator" approach. Catch you tomorrow.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. Team New Zealand and Luna Rossa are tied at 1-1 after day one of racing. Countdown Supermarket wants some of its workers vaccinated early as the next phase of the COVID-19 rollout is revealed. The government says there is more work to do before a two-way Trans-Tasman travel bubble is opened up. A scene guard will be in place at an Auckland property after one person died and another has critical injuries. Our next news and weather is at 7.
Take the pulse of the day's news every weeknight at 10.
Then we really do need to kind of ask ourselves how far we wish to become complicit in US military activities.
Lately with me, Karen Hay, is your late night eye on the latest headlines and the people who are making them.
What I would implore on people in our communities is if they have an issue with how the police have conducted themselves is to make a complaint about that.
Up to date if you're up late. Lately with Karen Hay every weeknight from 10 on RNZ National.
Thanks, Karen, and I'm Brian Crump, getting ready for another night on RNZ National. My first guest has arrived. He's tuning up. His name is Seamus Johnson. He's a guitarist and singer. He often performs with a band called Sea Mouse. He's performing solo on the sofa of your imagination. Yes, it's a sofa session after the news at 7. Ahead of the news at 7, we've got a report from the House team, the latest from Parliament. But first off, for detail, you might have heard in the news the case of 6 Dr. Seuss books, the Dr. Seuss publishing company, saying it's going to discontinue publishing 6 of the Doctor's books. Some people are saying this is an example of cancel culture. Now, like me, you might not be exactly sure what cancel culture is. But whatever you make of that phrase, perhaps this is a case of cancel culture, or perhaps it's a case of, well, sometimes books, just like some TV series and even some jokes, just go out of date sometimes.